My name's Aaron Silvers, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about my little adventure with Yammer. So it was fall of 2008, and the TechCrunch conference, like they issued out their awards, and I was starting to become an active Twitter user. I maybe had 100, maybe 200 followers, but I was tweeting every day. I had started the Learn Chat community was already forming. I was part of that. I mean, it was a good time to be in Twitter. And Yammer was announced as the winner of the TechCrunch Awards, and Yammer was pitched in a tweet as Yammer behind the firewall. And I was like, well, that sounds really awesome because I work in a very firewall heavy environment. At the time, at a company called Granger, WW Granger Incorporated, and I signed us up, and I used my work email address, and that created the Yammer account, and I invited people that were kind of like the people that I would either go out on smoke breaks with, or the people that I commuted with. And because that constituted really the sphere of my, direct influence in the organization. The organization's about, at the time, 16,000, 17,000 people, right? And I'm a high-level peon in the L&D department, but I'm a high-level peon in the L&D department. So from that, I think it was like September, October when that happened, and up until around March or April of 2009, it was really just, at most there was about 100 people that had ever signed up, and it was really below the radar. There was maybe 10 of us that were actively using it, and we were mostly doing it to just say, we're doing our status, talking about what projects that we're working on, or tell jokes, or just kind of reach out and say hi to each other across the divide of the organization. And then around, I think it was around April of 2009, Ashton Kutcher got a lot of notoriety for being on Larry King, talking about, the race to be having 1 million followers on Twitter. And that got a lot of attention from, because I guess a lot of people watch Larry King. And I got a lot of attention in the news, and certainly senior management and, C-level people at Granger were paying attention to that. And then since we're located more or less in Chicago, the Oprah then, once Ashton Kutcher had 1 million followers, then I think Oprah had him, or she had Ev Williams on the Oprah show. And since Oprah's based in Chicago, they got a lot of press. And no less than the president of the company went to his communications department in late April and said, I need to get a Twitter account set up. I need to start tweeting. We need to get on top of this. And the person that he talked to was his chief communications guy, his main communications guy, because Granger has a company communications policy, area. And the guy that he was talking to was one of the guys that was in my Yammer circle. He was one of the guys that I rode the train with, a guy named, I won't out him, but the guy's name is Mike. And Mike said to the president, who's also named Mike, before you start doing Twitter, maybe you want to do Yammer, so that we kind of understand what it is we're doing and we kind of get the flow of it going. And we have that internally that would only talk to our own employees. And we can then figure out this social media thing for ourselves, and then we can take it outside. And the president thought that was a really good idea. And he's like, well, who do we need to talk to? And he's like, well, you need to talk to Aaron Silvers. And so I get a phone call towards the end of the day. I think it was like it must have been like a Monday or a Tuesday. It must have been a Monday. It's like the end of the day Monday. I got this phone call from the communications department. This was my buddy Mike. And Mike's like, hey, so president of Granger is going to sign up for Yammer. And I'm like, really? And he's like, so what does he need to do? And I'm like, all right. So rule number 1 is don't be a douche. Rule number 2 is always post or tweet as himself. He can't have you do it. He can't have somebody do it for him. It's got to be his own voice. Rule number 3 is that he's got to do it every day. And it doesn't matter if it's only one a day, and even if he doesn't want to post something originally himself, if all he does is respond to like, a salesperson or a line worker, somebody on the low end, and just reply to what they're doing, that's going to make a huge difference. It's going to have a huge ripple effect. And then we talked about avoiding things like talking about like your vacations and your, going up to your lake cottage and things like that, because most employees probably don't have that, and so there's a disconnect. You want to be relevant. I'm like, that's really about it. And he's like, okay. He got off the phone. About 5 minutes later, ping, I get an email. President Mike Kulik is now following you on Yammer. So I hop on Yammer, and I'm like, oh, this is pretty sweet. And I'm telling all the people that I worked with in the ISD department, because, like, we're all on Yammer. And I'm like, dude, Kulik's going to be on. And they're like, oh, my God, really? I'm like, yeah. So we all get on Yammer, and he's looking around. He's like, hey, this is really great. I see Silvers has got, all the followers. He's got all this. And he goes, we're going to have to change that. And about 15 minutes later, he put out a blog post on his internal corporate blog, which he had. That was a structure that was already in place. And he said, we have to get on top of this social media thing. It's really big. We don't understand it. We're a conservative organization. We're kind of slow to these kinds of things. But we're going to get it. We have a thing called Yammer. Everybody go sign up for it. Boom. Now, we had 100 users prior to the president joining Yammer. By the next morning when I logged in, there were 1,000. And the phone calls started coming in by the end of Tuesday from legal and from corporate communications, built beyond my pal Mike, and from document retention and IT and messaging services and everybody else, demanding that I show up for this meeting that was going to be held, the emergency meeting that's going to be held on Wednesday morning. Because it was really obvious who did it, who brought it in. And what became very clear to me, as late as that Tuesday night when I started getting these like rash of phone calls and emails and invites, was that they really couldn't do anything to me. Because the president of the company had just said it was okay. So I had done something that completely bypassed legal, completely bypassed IT, completely bypassed all the different gating systems and stopgaps in order to do these things. And the president made it legal, made it all okay. So really then it was about, that next morning I got together with, it was a director of e-commerce, was like the guy who got me onto Twitter. And he was kind of, and he's been a lifer at Grainger. And he was kind of coaching me on just chill. This is all going to be all right. They can't, because I'm a little bit nervous. I just had a kid, I'm like, I really don't feel like losing my job over doing something that would seem to be so A, harmless, and B, like constructive.
Yeah.
I think that the biggest point of contention was that the idea that they were either going to A, buy it to shut it down. And so they were already starting to talk to Yammer's people, because that's how Yammer operates. They do it virally, and then if you want to turn it off or you want to have all the control features, you have to pay them. And I suggested in the meeting, I'm like, why do we have to pay them anything at all? Why do we have to do anything? Why do we need all these control features? Nothing bad has happened. I'm like, well, they're like, well, what happens if somebody posts something inappropriate? I'm like, well, then we just ask them to take it down. I'm like, it was like, and given the cost that Yammer was pushing on Grainger, and they were fairly heavy, they were not budging. And what at least seemed to be very straightforward advice, or at least a straightforward approach, would be just to ask people not to do stupid things. And that Grainger already had a policy about posting on the corporate blog, where, like, if you're going to comment on the blog, you had to be your real name. You had to abide by the business conduct guidelines, things like, things that were already established. I'm just like, well, we already have these things. I'm like, we don't have to create new policy. We don't have to create new controls. We just have to, you know, translate over to what we're doing. And everybody notionally agreed. And by the end of the week, it swelled to around 3,000 users. The very next day, so the key thing about what made Yammer special off the bat was the president was really smart. He sat in he downloaded the BlackBerry app right away, and like the day after 1 or 2 days after he was on Yammer, he was in a shareholder meeting, and he went out and basically posted from his BlackBerry to people who were on Yammer what the results were from the shareholder meeting, right from the boardroom table, which had never happened. Usually there was like a day or two to get like the cleaned, report from corporate communications internally. People got it right then and there. And every manager who was on Yammer, every employee who was on Yammer understood immediately what that meant, how powerful and medium this was. By the time I left Grainger, which was in April of 2010, now almost a full year after Yammer officially turned on, because the president got on. I think that there were about 7,000 or 8,000 employees on Yammer. I would guess that maybe there were 700 actively going on every day, and maybe about 70 actively posting, in commenting and responding to each other a day. And by far, to me, what I thought was, in my observation, the biggest success, the biggest tangible, in terms of what an ROI would be, was that Grainger launched a team of mid-market field sellers later on in 2009, like around summertime. And they didn't have access to email on their phones, and they weren't based out of an office. They were doing field sales, and the only way that they could really organize with each other and back to the mainland without calling up people was Yammer, because Yammer could be installed on everything. And I think that they probably did a couple $1 million worth of business in terms of revenue over that initial rollout. And a lot of that communication was done over Yammer. And Yammer cost the organization nothing to do it. So, was it a gamble for me? I didn't really think about it as a gamble at the time. I just kind of did it without really thinking about it. I think the worst that could have happened had anybody really wanted to make a stink was that I went out and did something in Grainger's name without following through, like whatever litany of policy they could have thrown at me to kind of justify it being a violation of policy. But I know from people telling me afterwards that Grainger, in fact, it was in some HR magazine article last year that Grainger actually purchased Yammer. So I mean, they've actually subscribed as an organization. So they're doing it, and I'm presuming it's still working for them. So that, I mean, it's that story is now probably very commonplace. I think there's probably lots of people doing that, but in 2008, 2009, there wasn't a lot of stories of people just going out and doing that kind of stuff.